The gunshot that never came would change 3 lives forever, though only 2 men stood facing each other in the dusty street of Jerome Junction, Arizona, on that scorching afternoon in August of 1883. Preston Ashford had been riding through the territory for 6 weeks, his weathered face bronzed by the relentless sun, his dark hair clinging to his neck with sweat beneath his hat. At 24 years old, he had already lived through more than most men twice his age, having lost his family's ranch in Texas to drought and debt collectors. He drifted now, picking up work where he could find it, moving from town to town with nothing but his horse, his saddle, and the Colt revolver that hung at his hip. Jerome Junction was supposed to be just another stop, a place to rest his horse and maybe find a few days of work before moving on toward California. The dispute had started in the saloon, as these things often did in the Arizona heat when men drank whiskey to forget their troubles, and only remembered them twice as sharp. Preston had been nursing a warm beer at the corner table when he overheard 2 ranch hands talking about a woman named Olivia. They spoke of her like she was already claimed, like she was some prize waiting to be won, and something about their tone made Preston's jaw tighten. He had never met this woman, did not even know her face, but the way they talked about her, as if she had no say in her own future, struck a nerve deep in his chest. When one of the ranch hands noticed Preston's dark expression, the situation escalated quickly. Words were exchanged, then chairs scraped back, and before Preston fully understood how he had gotten there, he was standing in the middle of the main street, the sun beating down on his shoulders, facing a man named Wade Jennings. Wade was older than Preston by perhaps 5 years, with sandy blonde hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to reflect the hard life of the frontier. He worked for the Morrison Cattle Company, one of the largest operations in the territory, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. He stood now with his hand hovering near his gun, his stance wide and ready. "You got no business talking about matters that don't concern you," Wade said, his voice carrying down the street where townspeople had gathered on the wooden walkways to watch. "Miss Olivia Caldwell is being courted by respectable men, not drifters who can't hold onto their own land." Preston felt the anger rise in his throat like bile. "Seems to me a woman should be courted by men who see her as a person, not property to be discussed over cards and whiskey." "You don't even know her," Wade shot back, and his hand moved an inch closer to his gun. "What makes you think you got any right to defend her honor?" "The fact that apparently nobody else will," Preston replied. His own hand had drifted to his gun without him consciously deciding to do so. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline sharpening every sense. He could hear the wind moving through the desert scrub beyond the town, could smell the dust and horse manure and his own sweat. The moment stretched between them like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Preston could see Wade's fingers twitch, saw the calculation in the other man's eyes. They were really going to do this. They were going to draw on each other over a woman neither had ever met, and one of them might die here in this God-forsaken street for pride and principle and nothing else. Then Preston saw her. She appeared at the edge of his vision, walking out from the general store with a basket on her arm. She wore a simple dress the color of sage, her dark auburn hair pulled back from her face, and when she realized what was happening in the street, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes, even from that distance, were the most striking shade of green Preston had ever seen, like new grass after spring rain. "What in God's name is happening here?" she called out, her voice clear and strong despite the tension crackling in the air. An older woman beside her on the walkway leaned in and whispered something, and Preston saw the color drain from the woman's face. This had to be her. This was Olivia Caldwell. "These men are about to draw on each other," someone in the crowd called out. "Over you, Miss Caldwell." Olivia's green eyes widened and she stepped forward into the street, seemingly heedless of the danger. "Stop this immediately, both of you." But Wade's pride was too far engaged now. "Madam, I'm defending your honor against this drifter who spoke out of turn." "My honor?" Olivia's voice rose with incredulity. "You're going to shoot someone over my honor when I have not asked you to, when I barely know you beyond pleasantries at church socials." Preston should have holstered his gun then. The woman herself was asking them to stop. But Wade had not moved, and Preston knew that if he backed down first, if he showed weakness, Wade might still draw. The code of the West was unforgiving, and turning your back on an armed man was suicide. "Madam, I apologize for the disturbance," Preston said, his eyes never leaving Wade. "But I won't be shot in the back for speaking the truth." Olivia looked between them, her face flushed with anger and something else, fear, perhaps, or frustration. Then she did something Preston never expected. She walked directly between them, standing in the line of fire, her basket still on her arm. "If either of you draws a weapon, you'll have to shoot through me first," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling Preston could see in her hands. "I will not have blood spilled on my account, especially not by men who think they have some claim to defend me when I have given neither of you any such right." The street fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Preston stared at this woman who had just risked her life to stop a gunfight between strangers, and felt something shift in his chest, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface of his skin. He made his decision. Slowly, deliberately, Preston moved his hand away from his gun. He raised both hands to show they were empty, then reached down with careful, measured movements and holstered his revolver. The click of metal sliding into leather was loud in the stillness. "You're right, madam," he said quietly. "This was foolish, and I apologize for frightening you." Wade stood frozen, his hand still near his gun, his face red with humiliation and anger. For a moment, Preston thought the other man might draw anyway, might try to shoot him now that Preston had backed down. But with Olivia standing right there with the whole town watching, Wade finally lowered his hand and stepped back. "This isn't over," Wade said, but the words sounded hollow, the threat of a man who knew he had already lost something. Olivia turned to face Preston fully for the first time, and up close. She was even more striking than he had first thought. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with fair skin dusted with freckles across her nose, and those remarkable green eyes that seemed to see right through him. There was intelligence in her gaze and strength, and a wariness that Preston understood completely. "Thank you for stopping," she said. "That took more courage than drawing would have." Preston felt his face grow warm, and not from the sun. "I should never have let it get that far." "I'm sorry, Miss Caldwell. You know my name, but I don't know yours." "Preston Ashford, madam. I'm just passing through." Something flickered across her face at those words, but before she could respond, Wade interrupted. "Miss Caldwell, I hope you can see that I was trying to protect you from what, exactly, Mr. Jennings?" Olivia turned to face him, and her voice had gone cold. "From a man who was apparently defending me from you and your friends who were speaking about me as if I were a piece of livestock to be traded." "Yes, I heard about that. Sarah Mitchell was in the saloon getting her father's dinner order, and she heard every word." Wade's face went from red to white. "That wasn't we didn't mean. I think you should go, Mr. Jennings. And you can tell the other men from the Morrison Ranch that I am not receiving callers, not from your outfit, and not from anyone who thinks they can speak for me without my permission." Wade opened his mouth, closed it, then turned on his heel and stalked away toward his horse. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, the excitement over, though Preston could hear the whispers starting already. This would be the talk of Jerome Junction for weeks. Olivia turned back to Preston, and some of the hardness left her expression. "I meant what I said, Mr. Ashford. It took courage to holster your weapon first. Most men out here would rather die than show that kind of restraint." "Most men are fools, madam, and I've been trying real hard not to be one myself, though I don't always succeed." Preston found himself reluctant to walk away, though he knew he should. He had already caused this woman enough trouble. A slight smile touched Olivia's lips. "Well, you succeeded today, at least in that final moment. Tell me, Mr. Ashford, why did you speak up in the saloon in the first place? Wade was right about one thing: you don't know me." Preston struggled to find the right words. How could he explain the anger he had felt hearing those men talk about her like she was already decided, already claimed? How could he tell her about his sister, who had been married off to a cruel man against her will, and how he had been too young and powerless to stop it? "I've known too many good women who never got a choice in their own lives," he said finally. "And I figured if I could speak up for you, even not knowing you, maybe it would balance out some of the times I kept silent when I should have spoken." Olivia studied him for a long moment, and Preston felt exposed under that gaze, like she could see every mistake he had ever made, every regret he carried. Then she shifted her basket to her other arm and said, "Would you walk with me, Mr. Ashford? I need to get these supplies back to my father's newspaper office, and I find I would appreciate the company." Preston blinked in surprise. "You sure that's wise, madam? Folks are already talking, and I don't want to damage your reputation further." "My reputation will recover, and if it doesn't, then I'll know who my real friends are." She started walking, and after a moment, Preston fell into step beside her. "Besides, after you nearly died defending my honor, even if I didn't ask you to, the least I can do is have a conversation with you." They walked down the main street of Jerome Junction, past the general store and the hotel and the bank, while Preston tried to think of something intelligent to say. Up close, Olivia smelled like lavender and ink, an unusual combination that made him curious. "Your father runs a newspaper?" he asked. "The Jerome Junction Gazette," Olivia confirmed. "He started it 5 years ago when we moved here from Missouri. I help him with the writing and the typesetting. He's getting older and his hands aren't as steady as they used to be." "You're a writer, then?" "I am." "I know that probably seems strange to most people, a woman doing that kind of work, but my father never saw any reason why I shouldn't use my mind the same as any man." There was pride in her voice, and perhaps a touch of defiance, as if she expected Preston to challenge her. "Seems to me the world could use more women like you," Preston said honestly. "Women who aren't afraid to speak their minds and do work that matters." Olivia glanced at him sidelong, and that small smile returned. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Ashford. Most cowboys who come through here are either looking for work or looking for trouble, and they don't tend to have opinions about women's education. I'm not most cowboys." Preston adjusted his hat, suddenly self-conscious. "And I had a mother who could read Latin and do mathematics that would make a banker weep. She taught me that intelligence has nothing to do with whether you wear trousers or a dress. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was." Preston's throat tightened. "She died 3 years ago, along with my father and my younger brother. Influenza swept through our ranch one winter, and I was the only one who survived." Olivia stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression softening with genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Ashford." "That must have been devastating." "It was. Still is some days." Preston looked away down the street toward the mountains that rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the afternoon heat. After they died, I couldn't keep the ranch going alone. Debts piled up and eventually I had to sell. Got enough to pay what we owed and not much else. Been drifting since, looking for something, though I'm not quite sure what. They resumed walking, and for a while neither of them spoke. When they reached a small building with a sign reading Jerome Junction Gazette above the door, Olivia paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Would you like to come in for some water?" she asked. "You must be thirsty after standing in that street." Preston knew he should decline, should mount his horse and ride out of Jerome Junction before he complicated this woman's life any further. But when he looked at Olivia, at the genuine invitation in her eyes, he found himself nodding. "Water would be appreciated, madam." The newspaper office was small but well organized, with a printing press taking up most of one corner and neat stacks of paper lining the walls. The smell of ink was stronger here, mixed with the scent of wood and paper and coffee. An older man with wire-rimmed spectacles and thinning gray hair looked up from a desk covered in handwritten pages. "Olivia, I heard there was some commotion in the street," he said, standing up with concern in his weathered face. Then he noticed Preston, and his expression became cautious. "And who might this be? Father, this is Mr. Preston Ashford. He's the man who holstered his gun first and stopped what could have been a tragedy." Olivia set her basket down and went to a shelf where a pitcher of water sat with several tin cups. "Mr. Ashford, this is my father, Thomas Caldwell." Preston removed his hat and extended his hand. "Sir, I apologize for any trouble I caused your daughter today." Thomas shook his hand with a firm grip despite his age, studying Preston with sharp blue eyes. "From what I heard, you were defending my daughter's honor against some of Wade Jennings' loose talk. That doesn't sound like trouble to me. Still, drawing a weapon in the street isn't something I'm proud of." "But you didn't draw, did you?" Thomas gestured to a chair. "Sit, son. Let's hear the whole story." Preston sat, accepting the cup of water Olivia brought him, and told Thomas what had happened in the saloon and then in the street. He didn't embellish or try to make himself look better than he was. He simply told the truth, including the part where his temper had gotten the better of his judgment. When he finished, Thomas leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. "The Morrison Ranch hands have been a problem for a while now. They think because they work for the biggest outfit in the territory, they can say and do whatever they please. Wade Jennings in particular has been sniffing around my daughter for months, despite her making it clear she has no interest." "Father," Olivia said, her cheeks coloring slightly. "It's true, and you know it. The man can't take no for an answer." Thomas turned back to Preston. "So what brings you to Jerome Junction, Mr. Ashford? Looking for work?" "I was, sir. Though after today, I'm not sure anyone in town will want to hire the man who nearly shot Wade Jennings." Thomas laughed, a dry sound like wind through desert grass. "Son, you'd be surprised. The Morrison outfit has more enemies than friends in this territory. They run cattle over smaller ranchers' land, divert water that doesn't belong to them, and generally act like they own the whole county. There are plenty of people who would be happy to hire a man with the spine to stand up to them." Preston hadn't expected that. He had assumed his confrontation with Wade would make him unwelcome in Jerome Junction, but perhaps he had misread the situation. "I appreciate that, sir, but I'm not looking to start a war. I just want honest work." "What kind of work are you good at?" Thomas asked. "I grew up on a ranch, so I know cattle and horses. I can fix fences, break broncos, track strays. I'm also decent with carpentry, and I can read and write, thanks to my mother's teaching." Thomas and Olivia exchanged a glance, and Preston saw something pass between them, some silent communication that spoke of years of understanding. "As it happens," Thomas said slowly, "I could use some help around here. The roof needs patching before the fall rains come. The floorboards in the back room are loose, and I've been meaning to build some proper storage shelves. It's not cowboy work, but it would pay fair wages and include a room above the office if you need a place to stay. Preston looked between Thomas and Olivia, trying to read if this was genuine or if they were offering out of pity. But Thomas's expression was serious, and Olivia was watching him with those green eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "I don't need charity, sir," Preston said carefully. "This isn't charity. This is work that needs doing, and I'm willing to pay a man to do it. The only question is whether you're willing." Thomas folded his hands on the desk. "I'll be honest with you, son. Part of the reason I'm offering is because of what you did today. You could have killed Wade Jennings, and you probably would have been within your rights after he drew on you. But you chose the harder path. That tells me something about your character." Preston felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. He could accept the offer and stay in Jerome Junction, at least for a little while. He would be near Olivia, this woman who had stepped between two armed men without flinching, who wrote for her father's newspaper and smelled like lavender and ink. Or he could ride out tomorrow, continue his aimless drifting across the territory, never knowing what might have happened if he had stayed. "I'll take the job," Preston said, "and I'm grateful for it." Thomas smiled and stood to shake his hand again. "Good. You can start tomorrow morning. For now, let me show you to the room upstairs so you can get settled. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and the bed is comfortable." The room above the newspaper office was indeed small and simple, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the main street of Jerome Junction. But it was more than Preston had expected, and after weeks of sleeping on the hard ground or in livery stable lofts, the prospect of a real bed was almost luxurious. That night, lying in the unfamiliar room with the sounds of the town settling into sleep around him, Preston stared at the ceiling and wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had come to Jerome Junction planning to pass through, and now he had a job, a place to stay, and a woman with green eyes who he could not stop thinking about. He knew it was foolish to develop feelings for Olivia after one conversation. She was educated, well-spoken, the daughter of a respected newspaperman. He was a drifter with no prospects beyond the temporary work Thomas had offered. But there had been something in the way she looked at him, some spark of recognition that went beyond the circumstances of their meeting. He had seen it when she thanked him for holstering his gun, had felt it during their walk to the newspaper office. Preston rolled over and closed his eyes, trying to will himself to sleep. Tomorrow he would start work, and he would do his best to be professional and respectful and not cause any more trouble for the Caldwell family. But as he drifted off, it was Olivia's face he saw, her green eyes serious and brave as she stepped between two armed men. The next morning dawned hot and clear, the way most mornings did in Arizona territory. Preston woke early, washed at the basin, and dressed in his cleanest shirt. When he came downstairs, he found Olivia already at work, setting type for the next edition of the newspaper. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and a smile crossed her face. "Good morning, Mr. Ashford. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months, Miss Caldwell, and please call me Preston. Mr. Ashford makes me feel like I should be sitting in a bank counting money." Olivia laughed, a warm sound that made something in Preston's chest tighten. "All right, Preston, and you should call me Olivia. We're going to be working in the same building after all. It seems silly to stand on formality. Your father doesn't mind." "My father believes that respect is shown through actions, not titles. As long as you're respectful, he won't care what you call anyone." She wiped her ink-stained fingers on a rag. "He's out back, looking at the roof. You should go find him." Preston found Thomas on a ladder leaning against the back of the building, squinting up at the wooden shingles. When he heard Preston approach, he climbed down with a grunt. "Morning, son. I hope you're not afraid of heights, because that roof is in worse shape than I thought. We're going to need to replace at least a third of the shingles before the rainy season starts." They spent the morning assessing what needed to be done and making a list of supplies. Preston discovered that Thomas was easy to work with, patient and willing to explain how things worked in Jerome Junction. He learned that the town had been founded during a mining boom 10 years earlier, and though the mines were mostly played out now, enough people had stayed to make it a real community. There were ranchers in the surrounding territory, a few farms in the valleys where water could be found, and enough commerce to support several businesses. "The Morrison outfit is the biggest problem we have," Thomas explained as they walked to the lumber yard. "Old man Morrison came here 15 years ago and claimed a huge stretch of land along the Verd River. Legally, he only owns about half of what he uses, but he's got enough hired guns that smaller ranchers don't dare challenge him. Wade Jennings works for him. Wade is Morrison's foreman. Smart as a whip when it comes to cattle, but mean as a snake when he doesn't get his way. He's been courting Olivia for 6 months now, ever since he saw her at a church social. She's turned him down a dozen times, but he won't take the hint." Preston felt a protective anger rise in his chest. "Is she in danger from him?" Thomas stopped walking and looked at Preston seriously. "I don't think Wade would hurt her directly. He's too worried about his reputation for that, but he might make trouble in other ways. That's part of why I was glad to have you around yesterday. If things had gone differently, if you had shot Wade or vice versa, it would have been a disaster. But the way it played out, with you backing down and showing restraint, it made Wade look like the unreasonable one. That protects Olivia more than violence ever could." They bought lumber and nails and new shingles, arranging for everything to be delivered to the newspaper office. Preston paid for it with some of the advance wages Thomas insisted on giving him, despite Preston's protests that he had not earned them yet. Over the next few weeks, Preston threw himself into the work. He patched the roof under the blazing sun, his shirt soaked with sweat by mid-morning every day. He fixed the loose floorboards, built sturdy shelves for storing back issues of the newspaper and extra supplies of ink and paper. He repaired the front steps and replaced a cracked window. Thomas paid him fairly and fed him dinner every night, insisting that it was easier than having Preston figure out his own meals. Those dinners became the highlight of Preston's days. Olivia cooked simple but delicious meals, and the three of them would sit together at the small table in the kitchen behind the office, talking about the day's news and the affairs of the territory. Preston learned that Olivia wrote most of the articles for the newspaper, that she had opinions on everything from territorial politics to the best way to organize a church social. She was passionate about education, furious about the treatment of the Apache who had been forced onto reservations, and deeply committed to the idea that a free press was essential for a functioning democracy. Preston found himself falling for her a little more with each conversation. She was unlike any woman he had ever known, fearless in her convictions, sharp in her wit, and kind in ways that seemed effortless. She would bring him water when he was working on the roof, would ask his opinion on articles she was writing, would laugh at his stories about growing up on a Texas ranch. But Preston held back from expressing his feelings. He was still just a hired hand, still a drifter with no real future to offer. And he was acutely aware that the whole town was watching them, that gossip about the cowboy who had defended Olivia Caldwell's honor was still making the rounds. He did not want to presume anything, did not want to make Olivia uncomfortable by declaring feelings she might not return. One evening in early September, after they had finished dinner and Thomas had retired to his room to read, Olivia and Preston sat on the front steps of the newspaper office, watching the sun set over the mountains. The heat of the day was finally breaking, and a slight breeze moved through the street, carrying the smell of dust and sage. "You've been here almost a month now," Olivia said quietly. "Do you think you'll stay longer once the repairs are finished?" Preston had been dreading this question. The truth was, he did not want to leave. He wanted to stay in Jerome Junction, wanted to keep working for Thomas, wanted to keep having these conversations with Olivia. But he also knew that eventually his welcome would wear out, that there was only so much repair work to be done on one building. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I'd like to stay, but I'm not sure there's a place for me here long term." Olivia was quiet for a moment, watching the colors change in the sky. Then she said, "My father told me what happened to your family. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. It was the hardest thing I've ever been through, losing all of them, losing the ranch, losing everything I thought my life was going to be." Preston picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers. "For a long time after, I was just numb. I went through the motions of settling affairs and selling the land, but I didn't feel anything. Then one day I was riding north and I realized I had no idea where I was going or why. I just kept riding because I didn't know what else to do. And now—" Preston looked at her, at the way the fading light caught in her auburn hair, at the serious expression on her face. "Now I feel like maybe I've found something worth stopping for, but I'm afraid it's not mine to keep." Olivia's breath caught slightly, and Preston realized he had said too much. He started to apologize, but Olivia reached out and touched his hand, stopping him. "What if I told you that I've been hoping you would stay?" she said softly. "What if I told you that I wake up every morning glad that you're here, that I look forward to our conversations more than anything else in my day?" Preston's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Olivia, I don't have anything to offer you. I'm a ranch hand without a ranch, a cowboy without cattle. You deserve someone established, someone who can give you stability and security. I deserve someone who sees me as a person, not a prize. Someone who would holster his gun rather than kill over false honor. Someone who treats me like an equal, who respects my mind and my work." Olivia's green eyes were intense in the twilight. "You're that someone, Preston. You've been that someone since the moment we met." Preston set down the stone and turned to face her fully. "Are you sure? Because once I tell you how I feel, once we cross this line, there's no going back to the way things were. I'm sure." Olivia's hand was still resting on his, warm and solid. "I've been sure for weeks. I was just waiting to see if you felt the same way." Preston lifted his free hand and gently touched Olivia's face, his calloused fingers rough against her soft skin. "I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stepped between two armed men without flinching. You're the bravest, smartest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I don't deserve you, but if you'll have me, I swear I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Olivia smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "You already are worthy, Preston. You just need to believe it yourself." Then she leaned forward and kissed him, and Preston felt the last of his defenses crumble. Her lips were soft and tasted faintly of the apple pie they had eaten for dessert, and when she pulled back, Preston was breathless. "I love you, Olivia Caldwell," he said, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "I love you too, Preston Ashford," she replied. They sat together on the steps as the stars began to appear, talking about the future for the first time. Preston confessed that he had been saving most of his wages, hoping to eventually have enough to start over somewhere. Olivia told him about her dreams of expanding the newspaper, of maybe starting a school in Jerome Junction, where children could learn to read and write properly. "What if we did it together?" Preston said, the idea forming as he spoke. "What if I kept working, saved up enough for us to buy a small piece of land? We could start a ranch, nothing big, just enough to support us. And you could keep writing for the newspaper, keep teaching. We could build something together." Olivia's eyes shone with tears and happiness. "Are you asking me to marry you, Preston Ashford?" Preston's heart stuttered. He had not meant to propose, not yet, not without a ring or a proper plan. But now that the words were hanging in the air between them, he realized that he meant them with every fiber of his being. "I am," he said. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a month, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Olivia, and I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" Olivia laughed through her tears and threw her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." They held each other as the night deepened around them, and Preston felt a peace settle into his bones that he had not felt since before his family died. He had been drifting for so long, lost and directionless, and now suddenly he had found a home. Not a place, but a person. Olivia was his home now, and he would do whatever it took to make her happy. When they finally went inside, they found Thomas sitting at his desk with a knowing smile on his face. "I take it from the look on both your faces that I should start planning a wedding," he said dryly. Olivia blushed but did not let go of Preston's hand. "Father, Preston asked me to marry him and I said yes. I know it's sudden, but—" Thomas held up a hand. "Olivia, I've been watching the two of you dance around your feelings for weeks now. I'm not surprised and I'm certainly not opposed. Preston is a good man and more importantly, he makes you happy. That's all I've ever wanted for you." Preston felt a surge of gratitude for this man who had given him a chance when he had nothing. "Sir, I promise I'll take care of her. I'll work hard and save up so we can." "I know you will, son. And I have a proposition for you." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking about this for a while now, even before tonight. I'm getting old and this newspaper is more work than I can handle alone. Olivia does most of the writing, but she can't do everything. I need someone to help with the business side of things, someone to handle subscriptions and advertisements and distribution. I need a partner." Preston blinked in surprise. "Sir, I don't know anything about running a newspaper." "You can read and write, you're good with numbers and people trust you. That's more than enough to start with. I'll teach you the rest." Thomas pulled out a document from his desk drawer. "I've been working on this proposal. If you agree, I'll make you a junior partner in the Jerome Junction Gazette. You'll earn a share of the profits, small at first but growing as the business grows. In exchange, you'll help run the paper and take on more responsibility as I get older. Eventually, when I'm gone, the paper will belong to you and Olivia." Preston was stunned. This was more than he had ever dreamed of, a real opportunity to build a future, not just for himself but for the family he and Olivia would create together. "Sir, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly generous. It's not generosity, it's good business. You and Olivia are going to be married. This way, you'll have a steady income and a stake in something that matters." Thomas smiled. "Besides, I like you, Preston. You've got integrity and that's rarer than gold out here." Preston looked at Olivia, who was beaming with joy and pride. Then he looked back at Thomas and extended his hand. "I accept, sir, and thank you for everything." They shook hands, and just like that, Preston's life changed completely. He was no longer a drifter, no longer a man without a home or a purpose. He was going to be a husband, a newspaperman, a member of this community. It was overwhelming and terrifying and absolutely right. The wedding was planned for October, giving them time to prepare but not so long that the whole town would think they were having doubts. Olivia wanted to be married in the small church at the edge of Jerome Junction, with her father officiating and a simple reception afterward. Preston agreed to everything, content to let her plan whatever would make her happy. But not everyone in Jerome Junction was pleased about the engagement. Wade Jennings, when he heard the news, was furious. He confronted Preston one morning, as Preston was walking back from the lumber yard with supplies for building some new furniture for the house he and Olivia would share after the wedding. "You think you're real clever, don't you?" Wade said, stepping out from the alley beside the general store. His face was flushed with anger, and Preston could smell whiskey on his breath even though it was only mid-morning. "Swooping in and stealing Olivia right out from under me." Preston set down his lumber and faced Wade calmly. "Nobody stole anything, Wade. Olivia made her own choice and she chose me. You need to accept that and move on. She only chose you because you made me look like a fool in front of the whole town," Wade spat. "If we had drawn that day, if I had beaten you, she would have seen that I was the better man. If we had drawn that day, one of us would be dead and Olivia would hate whoever survived for being so stupid." Preston kept his voice level, refusing to be drawn into another confrontation. "Let it go, Wade. There are plenty of other women in the territory. I don't want another woman. I want Olivia." Wade took a step closer and Preston tensed, ready to defend himself if necessary. "She's supposed to be mine. She's not a piece of property, Wade. She's a person with her own thoughts and feelings, and those feelings are for me, not you. Now step aside and let me get back to work." For a moment, Preston thought Wade might actually throw a punch. The other man's fists were clenched, his jaw tight with rage. But then someone cleared their throat behind Wade, and both men turned to see the town sheriff standing there with his hand resting casually on his gun. "Problem here, gentlemen." Sheriff Mackey was in his 50s, with a gray mustache and the kind of steady gaze that came from decades of dealing with angry men. He had been sheriff of Jerome Junction for as long as anyone could remember. "No problem, Sheriff," Preston said quickly. "Wade and I were just having a conversation." Didn't look much like a conversation to me. Looked more like Wade was about to do something stupid. The sheriff fixed Wade with a hard stare. "You causing trouble again, Jennings?" Wade straightened, trying to recover his dignity. "I have every right to talk to this man, Sheriff. He's marrying a woman who should have been my wife." "Should have been your wife?" The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Did she accept a proposal from you that I didn't hear about?" "No, but then she's not your anything, and you need to leave Preston alone. I heard about what happened last month, and I heard how you were talking about Miss Caldwell in the saloon. You're lucky her father didn't press charges for slander." The sheriff stepped between Preston and Wade. "Now I suggest you get back to the Morrison Ranch and cool down before you do something that lands you in my jail." Wade glared at both of them, but he knew better than to argue with the sheriff. He turned and stalked away toward his horse, and Preston released a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Thank you, Sheriff," he said. "Don't thank me yet, son. Wade Jennings is the type to hold a grudge, and he's got the Morrison outfit behind him. You watch yourself, especially in the weeks leading up to the wedding." The sheriff clapped Preston on the shoulder. "But for what it's worth, I think you're good for Olivia Caldwell, and I'm glad she's marrying someone with sense in his head." Preston carried that warning with him through the following weeks. He was careful to avoid being alone in isolated places, always aware of his surroundings. But Wade did not make another move, and Preston began to hope that maybe the other man had finally accepted defeat. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Preston finished all the repairs on the newspaper office and began learning the business side of running the paper. He discovered that he had a knack for talking to merchants and ranchers about placing advertisements, and his straightforward, honest manner put people at ease. Subscriptions increased, and Thomas was pleased with the results. Olivia continued writing articles, covering everything from town council meetings to the territorial legislature's latest decisions. She wrote a scathing piece about the conditions on the Apache reservations that drew angry letters from some readers and grateful thanks from others. Preston was proud of her courage, even when it made things difficult. They also spent as much time together as propriety allowed, taking walks in the evening, having long conversations about their hopes for the future. Preston told Olivia about his childhood in Texas, about his mother's love of learning and his father's dedication to the land. Olivia told him about growing up in Missouri, about how her mother had died when she was 12, and how she and her father had come west looking for a fresh start. "I think my mother would have liked you," Olivia said one evening as they sat on the hill overlooking Jerome Junction, watching the sun set. "She was the one who taught me to read, who encouraged my writing. She believed women could do anything men could do if they were just given the chance." "She sounds like she was an amazing woman," Preston said, taking Olivia's hand in his. "She was. I miss her every day." Olivia leaned her head on Preston's shoulder. "But I think she would be happy knowing I found someone like you. Someone who sees me for who I am, not who society thinks I should be." Preston kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of lavender that always clung to her hair. "I love exactly who you are, Olivia. I wouldn't change a single thing about you." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the October air finally cool enough to be comfortable. Preston stood at the front of the small church in his best clothes, his hands sweating despite the temperature. Thomas stood beside him, having agreed to stand up as Preston's best man since Preston had no family of his own anymore. "Nervous?" Thomas asked with a slight smile. "Terrified," Preston admitted. "What if I mess this up? What if I'm not the husband she deserves?" "Son, if you weren't nervous, I would be worried. Being nervous means you understand how important this is. But you're going to be fine. More than fine. You and Olivia are going to build a wonderful life together." Then the church doors opened, and Olivia walked in, and Preston forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her auburn hair was pinned up with small white flowers woven through it, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that she must have picked that morning. But it was her smile that truly took Preston's breath away, radiant and full of joy and love. She walked down the aisle alone, having insisted that she did not need anyone to give her away because she was giving herself freely. When she reached Preston, she handed her bouquet to her friend Sarah, who was standing as her witness, and took both of Preston's hands in hers. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about the challenges and joys of building a life together. Preston and Olivia exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams, to face difficulties together, to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston pulled Olivia close and kissed her, pouring all of his love and hope and gratitude into that single moment. The small congregation erupted in applause, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. The reception was held at the hotel, with most of the town turning out to celebrate. There was food and dancing and toasts with sarsaparilla and lemonade. Sheriff Mackey congratulated them and warned Preston jokingly that if he ever made Olivia unhappy, he would have to answer to the law. The owner of the general store gave them a set of fine china. Even people Preston barely knew came up to wish them well, and he was overwhelmed by the warmth of the community that had accepted him. The only shadow on the day was the absence of Wade Jennings and anyone from the Morrison Ranch. It was a pointed snub, but Preston was glad not to have to deal with Wade's resentment on what should be the happiest day of his life. As the sun began to set, Preston and Olivia slipped away from the reception and walked to the small house they would now share. It was modest, just 3 rooms really, but Thomas had helped them furnish it and Olivia had made it feel like home with curtains and rugs and small touches that reflected both of their personalities. They stood in the doorway, Preston holding Olivia in his arms, both of them reluctant to break the perfect stillness of the moment. "Mrs. Ashford," Preston said softly, testing out the sound of her new name. "I like the sound of that," Olivia said, smiling up at him. "Though I think I'll keep writing under Caldwell. It's what people know, and I've built a reputation with that name. I wouldn't dream of asking you to change it. You should be whoever you want to be." Preston lifted her up and carried her across the threshold, making her laugh. "But in here, in our home, you're my wife, and I'm your husband, and that's all that matters." They spent their wedding night talking and laughing and discovering each other, and Preston felt a completeness he had never known before. This was what he had been searching for during all those months of drifting. Not a place, but a person. Not security, but love. And now he had found it, and he was never going to let it go. The months that followed were the happiest of Preston's life. He and Olivia settled into a routine, working together at the newspaper during the day, coming home to their little house each evening. Preston proved to be a natural at the business side of the paper, growing their subscriber base and bringing in more advertising revenue. Olivia's writing continued to challenge and engage readers, and the Jerome Junction Gazette began to be noticed beyond the boundaries of their small town. They faced challenges, of course. There were weeks when money was tight, when they had to decide between buying a new dress for Olivia or fixing the leaky roof on their house. There were times when Olivia's articles angered powerful people, and Preston had to deal with angry merchants or ranchers threatening to pull their advertising. But they faced everything together, talking through problems, supporting each other, never letting difficulties drive a wedge between them. Wade Jennings remained a distant threat. He did not confront them directly again, but Preston heard stories about him spreading rumors, trying to turn people against the newspaper. The Morrison Ranch stopped advertising in the Gazette, which hurt their revenue for a while. But most people in Jerome Junction saw through Wade's petness, and the newspaper survived. In the spring of 1884, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. Preston was overcome with joy and terror in equal measure. He would be a father. He would have a chance to build the family he had lost, to create something lasting and good. But he also remembered the influenza that had killed his own family, remembered how quickly life could be taken away. "I'm scared," he confessed to Olivia one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "But we're going to be all right. We have each other and we're stronger together than we ever could be apart." Olivia continued working at the newspaper throughout her pregnancy, much to the disapproval of some of the more traditional women in town. But she was determined to keep writing, to keep contributing, and Preston supported her completely. When she grew too tired to typeset, he learned how to do it himself. When her back ached from sitting at the desk, he rubbed it until she felt better. Thomas was delighted at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He began teaching Preston even more about the newspaper business, preparing him to take on more responsibility when the baby came, and Olivia needed time to recover. In December of 1884, on a cold night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Olivia went into labor. The local midwife attended her, and Preston paced the small front room of their house, listening to Olivia's cries and feeling helpless. Thomas sat with him, calm and reassuring, reminding him that Olivia was strong, that she would be fine. After what felt like an eternity but was really only about 8 hours, the midwife emerged with a small bundle wrapped in blankets. "You have a son, Mr. Ashford, a healthy, strong boy." Preston's legs nearly gave out with relief. A son. He had a son. The midwife led him into the bedroom where Olivia lay exhausted but glowing, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. She held out her arms and Preston carefully placed their son in them. "He's perfect," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's absolutely perfect." The baby had a shock of dark hair and his father's nose, but when he opened his eyes, they were the same striking green as his mother's. They named him Henry Thomas Ashford, after Preston's father and Olivia's. Little Henry was a healthy baby with strong lungs, and he transformed their lives completely. Preston discovered depths of love he had never known existed. Holding his son, watching him sleep, seeing Olivia nurse him, all of it filled Preston with an almost painful joy. He worked harder than ever to provide for his family, taking on extra projects, expanding the newspaper's reach into neighboring towns. Thomas doted on his grandson, spending hours holding the baby and telling him stories about the old days in Missouri. Preston sometimes caught the older man looking at Henry with tears in his eyes, and he understood. Henry represented the future, the continuation of their family line, proof that life went on despite loss and hardship. But their happiness was disrupted one afternoon in February of 1885. Preston was at the newspaper office, working on the account books while Olivia was home with Henry. Thomas had gone to the territorial capital to cover a legislative session. Preston was so absorbed in his work that he almost did not hear the commotion in the street outside. When he did register the shouts and the sound of horses, he went to the window and felt his blood run cold. Wade Jennings was riding down the main street with 3 other men from the Morrison Ranch, all of them armed, all of them looking for trouble. Preston grabbed his gun belt, which he kept in the office even though he rarely wore it anymore, and stepped outside. Sheriff Mackey was already in the street, his own weapon drawn. "What's the meaning of this, Jennings?" the sheriff demanded. "We're here on Morrison business," Wade said, but his eyes were scanning the street, and Preston knew he was looking for him. "There's been cattle rustling on Morrison land, and we have reason to believe someone in this town is involved. If you have evidence, you bring it to me and I'll handle it. You don't ride into town with guns drawn like you own the place," Sheriff Mackey said firmly. Wade finally spotted Preston standing outside the newspaper office, and his expression twisted with malice. Well, if it isn't Preston Ashford, how's married life treating you? How's that baby of yours?" Preston felt a cold rage settle over him. The mention of Henry, the implied threat, was too much. He walked into the street slowly, his hand near his gun but not touching it. "Wade, whatever problem you have with me, we can settle it without involving innocent people. Let's talk this through like reasonable men." "Reasonable," Wade laughed, a harsh sound. "There's nothing reasonable about you stealing what should have been mine. You came to this town with nothing, and now you have everything: the woman, the job, the respect. It should have been me." "Olivia was never yours to lose," Preston said, keeping his voice steady. "She made her choice and you need to accept it." "I don't accept anything." Wade's hand moved toward his gun, and Preston saw the sheriff tense. "I think it's time we finished what we started last year. Draw on me, Ashford." "I'm not going to draw on you, Wade. I'm a husband and a father now. I'm not throwing my life away because you can't let go of your pride." "Then you're a coward," Wade sneered. The other Morrison men had spread out, creating a semicircle that put Preston at a disadvantage. This was not just about Wade's wounded pride anymore. This was a trap. Sheriff Mackey stepped forward. "Wade Jennings, I'm ordering you and your men to holster your weapons and leave town. If you don't, I'll arrest all of you for disturbing the peace." "You and what army, Sheriff?" one of the other men said. "There's 4 of us and one of you." "There's 2 of us," Preston said quietly, moving to stand beside the sheriff. He did not draw his weapon, but the implication was clear. He would stand with the law even if it cost him his life. Then, from various doorways and windows around the street, other men appeared. The owner of the general store with a shotgun, the blacksmith with a hammer, even old Doc Peterson, who had to be 70 if he was a day, with an ancient rifle. One by one, the citizens of Jerome Junction stepped out to stand with their sheriff and the man who had become one of their own. Wade looked around, his face pale with anger and fear. He was outnumbered now, and he knew it. If he started a gunfight, he and his men would be cut down. "This isn't over," Wade said, but the words lacked conviction. He wheeled his horse around and rode out of town, his men following. The tension in the street slowly dissipated, and Preston felt his knees go weak with relief. Sheriff Mackey turned to the assembled townspeople. "Thank you all. That could have gone very differently if you hadn't stepped up." "Preston's one of us now," the blacksmith said simply. "We take care of our own." Preston was overwhelmed with gratitude. These people, this community, had accepted him completely. They had been willing to risk their lives for him. He shook hands and thanked everyone, his voice rough with emotion. When he finally got home, he found Olivia standing in the doorway with Henry in her arms, her face pale with worry. "I heard what happened," she said. "Are you all right?" Preston pulled her into his arms, careful not to crush the baby between them. "I'm fine." Wade tried to start something, but the whole town stood with us. They sent him running. Olivia sagged against him. "I was so afraid. When I heard the shouting, I thought I might lose you. You're not going to lose me. I promised you a life together, and I intend to keep that promise." Preston kissed her forehead, then looked down at Henry, who was watching him with those serious green eyes. "Both of you." The confrontation with Wade was reported in the territorial newspapers, and it did not reflect well on the Morrison outfit. Public opinion began to turn against Old Man Morrison and his heavy-handed tactics. When a territorial marshal arrived to investigate the cattle rustling claims, he found no evidence linking anyone in Jerome Junction to the thefts. In fact, he discovered that Morrison had been systematically using land and water that did not belong to him, and the territorial government opened an investigation. Over the following months, the Morrison empire began to crumble. Smaller ranchers, emboldened by Preston's stand and the town's unity, began pushing back against Morrison's encroachments. Legal challenges piled up, and Morrison found himself spending more time in court than on his ranch. Wade Jennings, his reputation tarnished by his behavior in Jerome Junction, was quietly let go. Preston heard through the grapevine that Wade had left the territory entirely, heading to California to start over. He felt a mixture of pity and relief. He hoped Wade would find whatever he was looking for, hoped the other man would finally let go of his bitterness. But mostly, Preston was just grateful that the threat was gone. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. The newspaper continued to grow, and Thomas officially made Preston a full partner, splitting ownership of the Gazette 3 ways between himself, Preston, and Olivia. They hired a young man to help with the printing and distribution, freeing up more time for Preston and Olivia to focus on writing and business development. Henry grew from a baby into a rambunctious toddler with his mother's curiosity and his father's quiet determination. He loved being in the newspaper office, playing with blocks of type while his parents worked. Thomas would read to him for hours, teaching him letters and numbers before he was even old enough to understand what they meant. In 1886, Olivia became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy felt easier, less frightening. She knew what to expect now, and Preston was more confident in his ability to provide for a growing family. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1887, a beautiful baby girl they named Grace Caroline, after Preston's mother and Olivia's. With 2 children, a thriving business, and a strong marriage, Preston sometimes had to remind himself that just 4 years earlier, he had been a drifter with nothing to his name but a horse and a gun. Everything had changed because of one impulsive decision to defend a woman he had never met, and because that woman had seen something in him worth believing in. The years passed quickly after that, marked by the milestones of a full and happy life. Henry started school and proved to be as brilliant as his mother, devouring books and asking questions that stumped even Thomas. Grace grew into a spirited child who loved horses and wanted to learn everything her older brother knew. In 1889, Olivia gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and David, who kept the entire family running ragged with their endless energy. Thomas, growing older but still sharp as ever, gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the newspaper, content to write occasional editorial pieces and spend time with his grandchildren. Preston took over more of the business responsibilities, and Olivia continued to write articles that challenged and inspired readers throughout the territory. In 1891, Arizona Territory took another step toward statehood, and the Jerome Junction Gazette played a significant role in shaping public opinion about what kind of state Arizona should become. Olivia wrote passionately about the need for good schools, for fair treatment of all citizens regardless of background, for responsible stewardship of the land and its resources. Her articles were reprinted in newspapers across the territory, and she began to be recognized as an important voice in territorial affairs. Preston was incredibly proud of his wife, even as he worried about her taking on too much. She was a mother of 4, a newspaper owner, and increasingly a public figure. But Olivia seemed to thrive on the challenge, balancing all of her responsibilities with a grace that Preston could only marvel at. In 1893, Thomas became ill with pneumonia. Despite Doc Peterson's best efforts, the older man's body simply could not fight off the infection. He died peacefully in his sleep one winter night, surrounded by his family. Preston grieved deeply for the man who had given him a chance when he had nothing, who had welcomed him into his family and taught him a trade. Thomas was buried in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Jerome Junction, and half the town turned out for the funeral. Olivia took her father's death hard, but she found comfort in her family and in the newspaper that had been his life's work. She and Preston were determined to honor Thomas's legacy by continuing to publish a paper that served the community with integrity and courage. As the century drew to a close, Preston and Olivia's children grew into young adults. Henry, at 15, was already talking about going to college in the East to study journalism. Grace, at 12, was more interested in ranching and had convinced Preston to buy a small piece of land outside town where they kept horses and a few head of cattle. The twins, at 10, were still figuring out who they would become, but they were bright and curious and full of life. Preston was 40 years old now, with lines around his eyes and silver threading through his dark hair. Olivia was 38, as beautiful to him as the day they met, though she complained about the gray in her auburn hair. They had built a good life together, raised a family, contributed to their community. It was more than Preston had ever dreamed possible during those dark days after his family died. One evening in the spring of 1899, Preston and Olivia sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were inside doing their homework, and for a few moments they had peace and quiet. "You ever think about that day?" Olivia asked softly. "The day we met?" "All the time," Preston admitted. "I think about how close I came to throwing my life away over pride. If you hadn't stepped into that street, if I hadn't holstered my gun, everything would be different." "You would have won if you had drawn," Olivia said. "I saw the way you stood, the steadiness in your hands. Wade was angry and drunk. You would have killed him." "Maybe. But I also would have killed any chance of a future with you. No woman wants to marry a man who's proven he'll kill over words spoken in a saloon." Preston took Olivia's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You saved me that day, Olivia, not just from Wade, but from myself." "And you saved me," Olivia said, "from a life of being courted by men who wanted to own me, not love me. From thinking I had to choose between my work and having a family. You showed me I could have both, that I could be exactly who I was meant to be." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the evening. Then Preston said, "I was thinking we should take a trip. The whole family. Henry will be going off to college soon, and the twins are getting old enough to appreciate seeing new places. What if we went to California, saw the ocean?" Olivia's face lit up. "The children would love that, and I've always wanted to see the Pacific." "Then let's do it. We'll close the newspaper for 2 weeks, get someone to watch The Office, and just go. Have an adventure as a family." "An adventure," Olivia repeated, smiling. "I like the sound of that." They took the trip that summer. All 6 of them piled into a wagon for the long journey to the California coast. It was chaos and laughter and arguments and wonder, all mixed together. They saw the ocean for the first time, the endless blue stretching to the horizon, and Preston watched his children's faces as they experienced something so far beyond their everyday lives in Arizona. On the beach, with the waves crashing behind them and the children playing in the sand, Preston pulled Olivia close and kissed her. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For choosing me. For seeing something worth saving in a drifter who almost threw his life away. For giving me a family and a purpose, and a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You make it sound like I did you a favor. Preston, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. You're my partner, my love, my home." "I didn't save you. We saved each other." And as Preston looked at his wife, at his children, at the life they had built together from the ashes of loss and loneliness, he knew she was right. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful and lasting and true. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Henry did go off to college, studying journalism at a prestigious university in Boston. He returned 4 years later with a degree and modern ideas about how newspapers should be run, and he joined the family business with enthusiasm. Grace surprised everyone by announcing at 18 that she wanted to study veterinary medicine, and Preston and Olivia supported her dream, even when others in town thought it was strange for a woman to want to be an animal doctor. The twins eventually settled into ranching, buying land adjacent to the family's small spread and building it into something substantial. In 1902, Preston and Olivia celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary. They were in their 40s now, their children grown or nearly grown, their hair thoroughly streaked with gray. But when Preston looked at Olivia, he still saw the brave woman who had stepped between 2 armed men, still felt the same love that had overwhelmed him that first evening on the newspaper office steps. They renewed their vows in the same small church where they had been married, with their children and friends as witnesses. This time, there was no fear or uncertainty, only the deep satisfaction of two people who had weathered life's storms together and emerged stronger. In 1907, Preston took Olivia on a trip back to Texas to see the land where he had grown up. The ranch his family had owned had been sold and resold several times, and the current owners were a young family with children who reminded Preston painfully of his own siblings. He and Olivia stood at the fence line, looking at the land Preston's father had worked so hard to tame, and Preston felt a bittersweet ache in his chest. "I wish they could have known you," he said quietly. "My parents, my siblings, they would have loved you." "I wish I could have known them too," Olivia said, taking his hand. "But in a way, they're part of our children. Henry has your father's stubbornness, Grace has your mother's love of learning, and the twins have that wild energy you said your brother had." Preston realized she was right. His family lived on, not in the land or the buildings, but in the children he and Olivia had raised. In the values they had instilled, in the stories they had told, in the legacy of hard work and integrity and love that had been passed down through generations. They returned to Jerome Junction, to the newspaper that was now a respected voice in the newly admitted state of Arizona. Arizona had achieved statehood in 1912, and the Jerome Junction Gazette had been at the forefront of covering the transition. Olivia, now in her 50s, was still writing, still challenging her readers to think critically about the world around them. In 1915, Preston and Olivia became grandparents for the first time when Henry and his wife welcomed a daughter. Then Grace, who had indeed become a veterinarian, married a fellow doctor and had a son. The twins both married and started families of their own, and suddenly, Preston and Olivia's house was filled with grandchildren on Sunday afternoons. A chaos of laughter and noise that reminded Preston of when his own children had been small. He was 56 now, his hair completely gray, his body showing the wear of decades of hard work. But he was happy in a bone-deep way that had nothing to do with youth or vigor, and everything to do with a life well lived. One evening in the spring of 1916, Preston and Olivia sat on the porch of their house, as they had done countless times over the years. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, and in the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing in the yard. "Do you have any regrets?" Olivia asked suddenly. Preston thought about it seriously. He thought about the family he had lost, about the years he had spent drifting, about all the roads he had not taken. But then he looked at Olivia, still beautiful to him after 33 years of marriage, and he knew his answer. "Not a single one," he said. "Everything I've been through, every loss and hardship led me to you, and that makes it all worthwhile." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sun sink below the horizon together, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it side by side, the way they had faced everything else. In 1920, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. Preston was 61, Olivia 59, and they had 11 grandchildren now, with another on the way. The newspaper was thriving under Henry's management, though both Preston and Olivia still contributed articles and advice. Grace had opened her own veterinary practice in Jerome Junction and was training young women who wanted to follow in her footsteps. The twins ran a successful ranch that supplied beef to several towns in the region. Preston and Olivia had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. Their family, their business, their community, all of it was a testament to the love that had started with two cowboys drawing on each other over a woman neither had met, and a brave woman who had stepped between them. As the years passed into the 1920s, Preston and Olivia grew older together, their bodies slower but their minds still sharp. They took walks every evening, hand in hand, talking about the news of the day and reminiscing about the life they had shared. They had seen the turn of a century, had witnessed incredible changes in technology and society, had raised children who were raising children of their own. In the summer of 1925, Jerome Junction threw a celebration for Preston and Olivia's 42nd wedding anniversary. The whole town turned out, people bringing food and music, sharing stories about how the Ashfords had touched their lives. Preston was embarrassed by the attention, but Olivia basked in it, laughing and talking with friends old and new. As the celebration wound down and the sun began to set, Preston pulled Olivia aside, away from the crowd, to a quiet spot on the hill overlooking town. They stood there together, looking down at the community they had been part of for more than 4 decades. "We did good, didn't we?" Preston said softly. "We did very good," Olivia agreed. "Look at all of this, Preston. The people, the families, the businesses. We helped build this. Our newspaper informed people, challenged them to be better. Our children are making their own marks on the world. We created something real and lasting." Preston pulled Olivia close, holding her the way he had held her on their wedding day, on countless days since. She fit against him perfectly, the way she always had, the way she always would. "I love you, Olivia Ashford," he said. "I have loved you since the moment you stepped between 2 fools with guns, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you, Preston Ashford," Olivia replied, her green eyes still bright despite the years. "You were worth holstering for. You were worth everything." They stood there as the stars began to appear, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of purpose and meaning and love. They had faced challenges and hardships, had lost people they loved, had made mistakes and learned from them. But through it all, they had chosen each other, every single day. And as they walked back down the hill together, hand in hand toward their family and friends and the life they had created, Preston knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man alive. He had been a drifter once, lost and alone. But Olivia had given him a home, not just a place but a heart to belong to. And that was worth more than all the gold in California, more than all the cattle in Arizona, more than anything else in the world. Their love story, which had begun with violence averted and a brave choice made, had become the foundation for generations to come. And long after Preston and Olivia were gone, their descendants would tell the story of the 2 cowboys who drew on each other over a woman neither had met, and how she picked the one who holstered first and in doing so, changed 3 lives forever, and countless more beyond that.